Hello there and welcome to Black Jackal Gaming. With a whole new codex coming for Space Marines and the loss of Alpha moment for reroll wounds, GW's given some points drops to go along with it, which has kind of eased the burden of relying on one thing just to kill everything a turn. So we're going to look through the new options that we potentially have. The upgraded kits that have come out have all come down in prices, which is quite nice. There's plenty of cheap options to be found. Almost nothing has increased in price apart from one unit and an ability. And are the points drops going to be enough for the chapter? So we'll start off with the characters that have come down in price. So ancients across the board have come down. So they've come down 5 points a piece. Whether this makes them worth taking or not is up to debate. Mostly they're just going to give you, for example, the normal ancient. It's going to give you that additional OC, which for 50 points isn't necessarily that great when you could gain the additional OC pretty much just by taking more models in the unit, maximizing the 10 models in the unit rather than the 5. As he's coming in 50 points, he's quite expensive. It's the same with the Blade Guard Ancient. He gives you the abilities to once a battle have additional attacks, which isn't all that great when you consider 45 points. You can just bring more Blade Guard veterans with you anyway. Just maximize that squad up to 6 models in the unit. GW really wants you to take chaplains in this edition. They've seen that not many people are really taking them because the abilities that they come with aren't necessarily that great, and they were on the relatively expensive side. So what they've done is across the range they've dropped them by quite a decent amount of points. So the ordinary chaplain on foot is dropped by 5 points. Chaplain in Terminator armor, this is the new unit that's coming out, is dropped by a whole 15 points. Chaplain on the bike's dropped by 5 points, so he's actually very well valued at the moment, coming in at 75 points. And the chaplain with the jump pack, which is the old variant because we do not have an updated kit for this yet, has dropped by 10 points to 75 points. So they're all getting within the range where they're starting to become quite takeable, especially the chaplain on the bike if you are leaning towards the Stormlance detachment, where you're leaning more into being a White Scars player. And with a lot of the stratagems geared toward mounted units, he is currently the only person that can join your Outrider squads. The captain that's coming out with the jump pack, the new model, is dropped by 15 points. It's quite nice that when they're bringing out these updated units to the range, they are actually dropping them in points, where in the past they brought out new units or updated models and they've been quite expensive for what they bring. So you'd buy your new model, you paint it up, and then you realize actually I can't really take it on the battle top. It's either too expensive or it's not that good. So what they've done with this edition, which is quite nice, they seem to have priced them quite fairly and give them decent abilities. So when you do get your new model and you're excited to use it, you can actually use it. The librarians have come down across the range as well. The normal Primaris and full boss variants have dropped by 5 points, which is quite nice because the normal librarian was really being taken for a lot of units with his ability to give an invulnerable save to them, as well as potential funeral pains. And when you could stack that with the old bolted discipline, there were some units such as Stern Guard veterans that you could really get a lot of kick and juice out of them. The new Terminator variant is also dropped by 15 points, dropping down to 75 points, so he's looking very nice. The lieutenants have mostly taken a drop in points as well. So the normal variants dropped by 10 points. The Phobos and Reaver variants are both dropped by 5 points, so they're down to 55 points a model, which isn't too bad. Unfortunately, the Phobos Lieutenant that comes with the Combi Bolter, the one that has the lone operative keyword, has not dropped in points, so he's still quite expensive at 75 points. And when you're comparing him to the other characters you can take, he's leaning towards the position where you can't really justify taking him too much anymore for just the value you get out of his points. He's still quite good because he's got the lone operative and he has other shenanigans he can move, but he has very little damage output in combat or in ranged attacks either. So he's literally there just to be a bit of a nuisance and maybe hold parts of the board that you otherwise would have a little bit of trouble holding. The Tech Marines come down by 10 points, which is quite a big drop, especially since some of the new detachments can really lean into a vehicle and dreadnought meta, and this guy's going to buff them through the roof, including the stratagems and the the upgrades you can give to them. So drop them by 10 points. I can expect some of these attachments to take a minimum of 1, 2, maybe even up to 3, depending on exactly how they want to play the detachment. The only other thing to point out really is the Judiciar, who's dropped by 5 points. He does give you the option of fighting first, which is quite nice, but coming in at 70 points and his melee output just being decent, he's still quite on the expensive side, so probably not going to see much action on the tabletop, like in 9th edition as well, when he was just far too expensive to what he could bring to the tabletop. Next up, we're going to go through the infantry units. So first up, we've got the aggressives. They've actually gone up by 10 points. They actually had a price increase in the last point update as well, so they've been double hit. But the good thing about aggressives is that there's many of the new detachments that they have stratagems and character upgrades that really feed into aggressives that can really pump up their damage output, whether it's increasing the roll to wound, AP on the flamers, allowing them to advance and charge. Aggressives have really put themselves in a position for the new codex where they can really be a utility for almost every single chapter. Even those chapters where they don't lean into too hard, they're still a really good unit for almost everyone. Outriders have gone down again. This is back-to-back point drops. They're still quite pricey for their output. They don't really have much damage output, either by range or melee. They have a fair few melee attacks, but coming in at strength 4, -1/1 damage. They really struggle to kill much, even when they're going into a guard unit. If you've only got three outriders in the squad, they're going to really have a lot of trouble actually wiping the squad. So they're not great, but what they do bring is utility in the game, the ability to be there as a counterpunch, be there to go and take objectives, to take early access to quadrants on the field, score you basically secondaries. This is what these guys' jobs are. They're there to sit on the wings, move forward when necessary, and move into the right positions to get you those points in secondaries, or even just tie up other units so they can't bring strong units to play early on in the game, or even when you're coming into the end game, just there as a counterpunch, just to let people know that if you want to move on to this objective, you might possibly lose that other objective that you really need to hold on to. So they do have a fair bit of play. The two Terminator variants have both go down in points. Assault Squad's gone down by 10 points. I wasn't too sure why these were more expensive anyway, even though they are still expensive, because they don't have a massive damage output, and the ability to get into combat isn't that great. So for them to be easily 10 points higher is a little bit of a joke to begin with. They should really be the same points as the normal Terminator Squad. And the normal Terminator Squad has come down by 5 points. So they are closer together, but there is still that gap. With the new unit coming out for these guys in true scale, they're really trying to lean into you should be taking these in your detachments. They do have a lot of versatility. The damage output by range isn't too bad, and in combat it's quite good, and they are tough. So GW does want to encourage you to take them in all your detachments. Whether you take them is up to yourself. They are a good unit, but they are slightly on the pricey side for 5 models. And they do really need the buff with either a captain or a chaplain there just to give them a little bit more damage output. Stern Guard is a bit of a weird one. In the last balance update, they went up in points, and then they put them straight back down in points, which is a bit strange. But I think this is to do with the Oath of the Moment nerf. Stern Guards really wanted that reroll to wound, and when you lose that reroll to wound, being 110 points for what's essentially 10 shots, a BS4, wounding on 4's devastating wounds, you're not really pushing that many wounds through. So by dropping them by 10 points, it lightens the load a little bit, but you're probably not going to see these on the tabletop all that often now. The new Scout kit's gone down by 10 points, so they have lost some of the options in the previous Scout kit, but to get a 5-man unit for 55 points, that's going to come in and have Scout move and infiltrate. It really allows you to take up an aggressive position early on the board, maybe tie down an objective, maybe move in a position where you can score first turn secondaries. So they're a really good unit at 55 points. There's not many units in the game that are going to come in at that points level for Space Marines. We can really use them just to score points. The Imposer saw a lot of play in 10th edition because it was quite nicely pointed at 85 points. With the Fire Index 6, you could easily put something like your Sternguard veterans in it with a librarian, and with your Oaths of Moment, they are literally turn 1 going to nuke any infantry unit they're going into. So removing the reroll moves for Oaths of Moment will hurt a lot of options in the game, but Impulsors are still going to remain strong, especially with another 5 points knocked off the total. I can imagine most people are going to run 1, maybe 2 of these in a list, depending on which direction they're leaning. Razorbacks also went down by 5 points. These aren't saying an awful lot of play. They are okay for the points. Lacking the Fire Index just means that you're not really getting much utility out of them. For a couple of extra medium to high strength shots, you can pick them up at different units for a lot more efficiency, so you might as well just go with an Impulsor instead. Last up, we've got all the vehicles and the flyers. I thought I'd group all these together with the fortifications because it just makes more sense than splitting them up into smaller screens, really. So the Storm Speeders across the board, they've gone down by 10 points. They're still, like, the Thunderstrike's still slightly on the pricey side, and the Hammerstrike, they could have done really with coming down by another 5 to 10 points. The Hellstrike as well. They do have some nice abilities tied into them by giving additional AP or rerolls for the units that they target for other units to then target. So they are good in that instance, but being such a large model and quite a bit of points to go into it, they are easy for the opposition to pick up and neutralize quite early on. So they are good units, but whether you're going to take them for this reduction is still up in the air. The Stormhawk and Storm Talon both went down in prices. This is a great model. I've got an Interceptor, Stormhawk Interceptor, and it looks great, but it's just not that playable. 155 points by going down by 10 points, it doesn't really add much to taking it to the game. It's still really expensive for what it is. If you come on turn 1, it means you can't move, which really impacts your ability to get across to the board, and then you minimize the 20-inch movement. If you're not doing that and you want to be a true flyer, then you're coming on turn 2, again into your deploy, well, within the table edge, so you're really minimizing where you can get to. The assault cannons then being twin linked rather than separate hurts its damage output. Even though they do have devastating wounds, you've not really got enough dice rolls there to really have an impact. The Las Tannen's good. The Las Tannen on everything's quite good, but for 155 points, there's just much better options out there that you can utilize for the entire game rather than potentially early on. The Storm Talon is in the same position, really. It just doesn't do enough for the points, and there's too many restrictions placed on it. The gunship, the Storm Raven gunship, again 40 points with the same limitations. You've just got points you can spend much more efficiently elsewhere that you can utilize for larger periods of the game. There's not really an awful lot of point in taking them. So the Redemptor chassis, including the Invictors, have come down, apart from the Brutalis, which is actually still quite expensive. I was a bit shocked that didn't come down, but the Basilisk did anyway, because most of these chassis come down under the last points deduction, and some of them really needed it because they were drastically overpriced. The Brutalis, Invictor and Redemptor were all overpriced. The Basilisk coming down to 150 points was probably fairly priced. People were starting to take it at that price point because it was quite efficient, but the Redemptor being 210 was still far too expensive for what it can do. And the Invictor Warsuit at 150 points just had no damage output really, and was too large a model to really hide. So if your opponent really wanted to, it'd be gone turn 1 or 2. So it was just a bit of a sink for points with not much utility out of it. Coming down to 140 points for the Invictor and the Basilisk, that puts them in the ballpark of what you are going to play. I think you are going to take the Basilisk Dreadnought because it does have a fair bit of damage output and some good abilities at 140 points. It's really going to start creeping into list, especially the attachments that really utilize stratagems and auras for the Dreadnought. So I'm going to predict that they're going to see an awful lot of play. The Redemptor at 200 points is still slightly on the pricey side. Probably needs to come down by a further 15 points really for what it offers. The Invicta Warsuit, 140 points, is starting to become interesting. Its damage output is still mediocre, but just its ability to early game contest objectives, contest board space, score those secondaries and be relatively tough and offer a threatening counter-attack. Couple that with, if you go with White Scars, it can advance and charge. It does really open the possibilities of making your opponent really think about the deployment and the tactics at the start, because you do have a threat basically within their midst from the start of the game. Again, it won't last long in the game, but 140 points as a little suicide unit that can score you points is actually looking quite good. Both repulsor variants come down. Again, GW seems to have this thing with the repulsor where it looks at it and goes, oh, that's got a lot of shots, that's got a lot of guns, and it's big, let's make it a lot of points. And then the edition drops and no one takes it because it's expensive as hell. It doesn't really have the damage output that GW predicted it would have. It's so big it struggles to get around the tabletop of all the terrain, and it's really hard to hide because of its size. Not only that, it can move block your own, well, not so much in 10th edition, but in 9th you can move block your own army. It doesn't really carry up that many models for it being a transport as well. So it was just in the vicinity of, this is a really expensive model that's probably going to die turn 1 or 2 and not really have much output. Now that they've had back-to-back points reductions, you're going to see more play from them. The Repulsor is going to see more than the Executioner, because the extra 30 shots really for a slightly harder hitting main weapon and a couple of extra shots from the Repulsor defense array, is it? Is that really worth the extra 30 points? It's really not. The fact that the Executioner come down by more points shows that GW is realising that there's too much of a gap in between them. But realistically, there shouldn't be a gap of more than 15 points, maybe even 10 points in there, because they are very similar units with a slightly more output from the Executioner, not enough to warrant a 30-point increase. You are going to see probably the Repulsor have quite a bit of play, especially now that it can synergize really well with the Tech Marine and some of the detachments. The Whirlwinds come down by 5 points. The Whirlwind is the Whirlwind. It's good. Basically every edition, it has a nice amount of shots, does a nice amount of damage, and doesn't need to look at what it's shooting at. To come down by 5 points when it was already, well taken by the community, it's a bit of a shock. So you know what, it's going to be taken even more now. As well as that, you got the Fire Strike. Now I think this is a really underrated unit. Everyone complains at things like the Fire Strike, but when you look at it for 75 points, you get a Las Talon. There's 2 shots, ballistic skill 2. There's not many units in the game that's going to have a 2-shot Las Talon at ballistic skill 2 for 75 points. So for your 2 shots at ballistic skill 2, you come in at strength 10, -3, damage is d6 +1. It's twin links, so you're re-rolling the wound roll. If you're into the Alpha Moment target, you're re-rolling the hit roll. It's toughness 6, 6 wounds, 2 up save. It's actually objective control 2 as well. You can take 2 units in the 2 models in a unit, so if you are putting any stratagems on it, you can boost them fairly well. And anytime you want to use this unit in Overwatch, it's got the ability where it can Overwatch on a 4+, which is quite nice. So for 75 points, this model actually does a fair bit. And even in combat, it's coming in at 3 attacks, weapon skill 3, strength 4, 1 damage. So it's not exactly terrible in combat. If you've got guard or termagants charging it, it's actually going to hold its own to a certain extent in combat. It's just, I think it's a really good unit. It's a bit on the big side. It can only move 3 inches. That holds it back. So it's really about utilizing this well and firing lanes and being a threat. You might put it in a position where it's not always going to have targets to shoot at, but the fact that you can put it in a channel towards an objective and say to your opponent, right, you can step into that channel if you want. If you're within the Overwatch range, I will be hitting you on 4 straight away in your own turn. And if not, well, if you end up peeking out and I can see you, I've got 2 shots at ballistic skill 2. I'm re-rolling the wound in the strength 10 anyway. I'm probably going through your save unless you've got a vulnerability save, and it's d6 +1 damage. So I'm going to do a lot of damage for anything that's going to try and step across that lane. Last up, you get the Hammerfall Bunker. It's coming in at 175 points, so it's had a drop in 35 points, which is a massive drop in points. The problem you've had is that it's had a little bit of nerf in the codex. It has more restrictions on how it uses its ability. The ability was quite good, being able to shoot at 4 targets in your opponent's turn, basically when they move. But that's now being nerfed, so you don't have as much utility out of it. And you're essentially shooting heavy bolters, so they're not that great. So when you look at the points value for the size of the model, the difficulty in placing it, the fact that it can't move, for 175 points for a couple of bolter shots and a couple of missile shots, it's very expensive for what it does, and there's just better options out there. If it dropped by another 40 to 50 points, it's probably in the range where you start considering it, but unless it's hitting that 100-point mark, it's probably not going to be on your agenda at all. The last thing that we've got is the upgrade, the character upgrade for the bolter discipline. That has gone up in points. It's had a rebrand. It's now called Fire Discipline, because we weren't really taking on bolters anyway, and it's gone up by 5 points to 30 points in total. It's still a really good upgrade, giving you that sustained hits as well as the sustained hits of a 5+ when in the Devastator Doctrine. So if you're putting on something like your Sternguard veterans, your Hellblasters, your Desolators, you're really ramping up the amount of damage output these guys can do with their high rate of firepower, having sustained hits on 5+. It's a really good option, and you're still going to take it if you're taking the Gladius detachment. Thank you for watching the video. If you have any comments, then pop them below in the comment section. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button, as it greatly helps the channel. Hit the subscribe button to see any future Warhammer content. Take it easy, and see you next time for more grim darkness from the 41st millennium.